Focus of today's webinar is the Energizing Rural Communities Prize, which is a prize sponsored by the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. This webinar is the first in a two-part series designed to empower Virginia's rural communities to access federal clean energy funding opportunities. Before we get into it, I want to cover a few housekeeping items with you. First, you should have joined in muted mode. If you want to come off mute during the discussion, I'll show you how in the next slide. This video is being recorded. The slides, the video recording, and the Q&A responses will be posted to the event website, which is linked here. Another way to get to it is to go to solar.coopercenter.org and select the Resources tab. We would encourage you all to use the chat to enter your role, maybe reveal what brings you here today, where you're from, and what your interests are in clean energy in your community. The chat is found in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, as indicated by this blue arrow. When it comes time for the Q&A, we'll ask you to submit your questions using the Q&A feature. It's not necessarily intuitive how to get to it, but if you look in that far lower right-hand corner, there's a circle with an ellipsis in it. If you click on that, it'll bring up your Q&A feature. And then during the discussion section of this webinar, we'll encourage you to participate. If you use the raise hand feature, which is this, the left-hand arrow shown below, it looks like a little hand. If you raise your hand, then the moderator can take you off mute and you can participate in the discussion. Today's agenda, we have a full agenda. After I finish wrapping up the introductions here, I'm going to turn it over to Austin, who is going to provide some welcoming remarks from the Virginia Department of Energy. I'll provide a few slides on the Virginia context, and then we're going to turn it over to our special guests today, Courtney Haynes and Jenny Weigel, who will be discussing in detail the Energizing Rural Communities Prize and touching on some other ERA funding opportunities. Emily Yang will cover a few additional funding opportunities, and then Austin Counts will moderate the Q&A and the discussion and close us out. With that, I'll turn it over to Austin to provide his welcoming remarks.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Can you hear me okay? Oh, awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. My name is Austin Counts, and I'm the Rural and Industrial Clean Energy Programs Manager with the State Energy Office within the Virginia Department of Energy. I'm located in our Big Stone Gap office in far Southwest Virginia, along with my colleague Brooke Vernon, who's also on the call here today, who is our programs coordinator and who is working behind the scenes on all the technology, helping keep up with chat, helping to mute and unmute people. But was also a big part of coordinating this webinar here today. So we have a full slew of people on the call here that we can thank for a very effective and very informative program. And so, as you're already aware, we are working with the Weldon Cooper Center for Public Engagement at UVA on this webinar series, the first in a two-part series. And so as we go through this presentation here today, feel free to go ahead and put any of your questions in the question box so that we can address them later. We will have a kind of separate Q&A, as Elizabeth already mentioned. But before that, before we jump a little bit forward, I just want to mention a little bit about the Virginia Department of Energy. And so, like I said, we work with the State Energy Office, which is a part of the larger Virginia Department of Energy. Virginia Energy is formerly known as the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy, and alongside our State Energy Office, we also host the Virginia Geological Survey. We also regulate the extraction of minerals, coal, gas, and oil in Virginia, and even promote and support economic development opportunities across the state. And so with all the different federal funding opportunities that are coming available right now at the federal level, it's really a goal of the Rural and Industrial Clean Energy team to make sure that all rural communities across Virginia have access to information and resources needed for applying for these funding opportunities. We want to see as much of this funding as possible come to Virginia. And so we're wanting to make sure that we're out there and available as a resource for any locality or community that's applying for these federal funding opportunities. as already mentioned, we have a great group of people on the call here today, and hopefully you've come away with all the information and resources you need to decide if any of these opportunities are of interest to you. And in that case, we're always welcome to having people reach out to us either on the call here today through the follow-up surveys or individually, and we'll provide all of our own emails at the end of the call. And so really with this webinar series, our hope is that it helps ensure access to reliable, affordable, and clean and abundant energy to all Virginians so that we can work, live, and raise families in the growing and thriving Commonwealth. So with that out of the way, I want to kind of present our first question of the webinar here today, and it's really quick. And it's just, what is your prior knowledge or experience with the Energizing Rural Communities Prize? This is just one of the funding opportunities that we're mentioning here today, but it's definitely one that we're going to be spending the most amount of time on. And so please go ahead and provide in chat. Is this completely new to you? Were you aware of this, but not really certain if you qualify? Or is it something that you're already working on an application for? And we'll just take a couple of minutes to see if there's any responses coming in. And thanks to everybody for going ahead and introducing themselves in the chat as well. All right, so I see one aware but not sure about qualifications. And I think that's something that we've kind of seen across the board as well. And so please do feel free to continue kind of introducing yourself, putting your names in the chat, putting kind of what you think or how aware you are of this funding opportunity. And I also want to say to utilize this opportunity to connect with other people in Virginia as you see fit. A big part of these programs are partnerships. And so always feel free to reach out to the other folks that you see on the call here today. But with that, I think we want to pass it back over to our Weldon Cooper Center specialists.
Great. Thank you so much, Austin. So I'm really happy today to provide some Virginia-specific context to what brings us here today and what's driving this clean energy market in Virginia. So this is a graph that illustrates the electricity demand forecast for Virginia until the year 2050. And as you can see, this dotted vertical line shows demand in 2020, and it projects expected demand over the next 30 years. The high growth forecast is this red line on top, and the low growth is on the bottom. This dotted green line shows the central case, or the average expected demand. And in any of these cases, you can see it's quite significant amount of increased demand for electricity over the next 30 years. If we go, looking at this green line or even this high demand, and this DC in this case stands for data center. So high data center growth, high electric vehicle demand growth. You can see that growth is almost expected to double in the next 30 years. So we really have to think creatively and be innovative about the ways that we will be generating and accessing electricity. Many people have described that what we are about to embark on is an energy transition. And this means that we won't necessarily be accessing or generating electricity in the same way that we have in the past, which, in the past we had electricity generated at several power plants and then distributed through the grid to the end user. What we're expecting to see is democratization of this. And what that means is that energy is going to be generated in different ways, in different places, in some cases closer to the consumer, and energy may be flowing both ways. So there's a lot to think about and a lot of opportunity in the growing market. When we look at, in Virginia, what type of electricity is being produced by its source, we can see that over the last 20 years, the source of generation has changed significantly. Historically, a large portion of our electricity came from coal, and in more recent years, we can see that in this graph, it's called methane, but natural gas is taking a larger share. And this mustard colored thin line across the top that sort of opens up to the right-hand side here, where it says 2020 to 2022. Those are our renewables. So hydro, wind, solar, those are claiming an increased market share here in Virginia by source. So we expect that to continue as well. There are several drivers of demand for electricity, and more specifically, clean energy here in Virginia. Market demands is at the top of the list. So, corporate renewable portfolio standards, um, public demand for clean energy, combined with technological improvements that make it more affordable and more reliable for clean energy. There's an increased energy resilience factor here. So, being able to tap into those technologies and those things like storage and other types of energy generation that create more reliable sources and abundant sources of power. There's federal policies, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Investment Tax Credit are all contributing to increased demand for clean energy and increased funding to help generate research and development and pilots and demonstration projects. At the state level here in Virginia, the Virginia Clean Economy Act, Solar Freedom Bill 2020 are contributing to certainty in the market. So there's more investment going into renewable energy here in Virginia. And then finally, regional transmission organizations and utilities are required to generate their own plans. And these plans are also reflecting an increased desire and demand to develop clean energy. And finally, this map shows, it only shows solar facilities above 5 megawatts that are in operation today or as of February of this year. And while there are many different types of generation for renewable energy, and this is only looking at one specific one, it does show that across the state, there are large swaths of the state that aren't tapping into or aren't contributing or participating necessarily in this clean energy transition. And then it shows for us that there may be opportunities specifically in rural areas for rural areas to access additional resources to help them. So there may be barriers or there may be characteristics of rural communities that are that require specific attention or specific opportunities. And so we're happy today to present some of these funding opportunities specifically to help in rural areas. And so next, I'd like to invite our guest speakers, Courtney Haynes and Jenny Weigel. Courtney is the stakeholder engagement lead at the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations at the U.S. Department of Energy. And Jenny's a project manager with the Hydropower and Water Systems Integration at National Renewable Energy Lab. And they'll be talking with us today about their program and the Energizing Rural Communities Prize.
Thank you. Go ahead and get our slides off. Well, thank you so much for all of those that are joining today, taking time out of your busy schedules to learn a little bit more about this program. And I know there's a few other funding opportunities that the team will review here later today. So I'm Courtney. I am stakeholder engagement lead for this specific program under OSED and this prize. We'll go ahead and move to the next slide here. The agenda, me and my colleague Jenny at NREL supports this prize in partnership with OSED, are going to walk you through a different components. We're going to talk about OSED in general and the program itself. And later I'll talk about some other open funding opportunities that we have going on. Then we're going to get really into the weeds and the details of the prize itself, what it looks like, what the criteria is. There are two different tracks, and also talking about all the resources that we have for you all to take advantage of if you're interested in applying to the prize. Then we'll wrap up and we'll have an opportunity to do some Q&A that hopefully some of you all can submit of the Q&A feature here at the bottom when you click on those three dots. So we'll go ahead and move on. We'll just kind of go past this slide in general. I'm sure many of you obviously are familiar with the Department of Energy and all of the incredible funding and programs that we have, especially in light of both the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. Just incredible amount of funding and lots of different types of opportunities to really support this energy transition. One of the new bureaus that were stood up under DOE by the bipartisan infrastructure law was OSED, which stands for the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. This is a new bureau of about $25 billion And we have various programming across a lot of different technologies and community place driven investments as well. The point of OSED is to really fill that market gap from traditional R&D to, on the other side, that kind of long-term scale capital investments in the loan program. So we're all about really accelerating deployment and market adoptions and really thinking about commercialization. As I mentioned, we have a few different programs at OSED, but one that I work on pretty much all the time and very closely is this Energy Improvements in Rural or Remote Areas program. This is a $1 billion multi-year initiative in OSED, and it does look a little bit different. We were not given the same type of parameters, whether it was technology or other definitions in some of the other programs. So we have a lot of flexibility in how we're thinking about using the funding. We were given a definition that the impact has to be in populations and communities of 10,000 people or less. But again, kind of really broad parameters of making sure we're using this funding to really think about decreasing costs and energy burden and improving resiliency. So we've spent really the last 6 months on the road talking to a lot of different stakeholders, a lot of different community representatives to really understand how should we start spending this money? Where should we start? And we learned so much, we've heard so much, and we certainly have a lot of representatives and developers and communities who are ready for construction, have their projects. But we heard from a lot of small communities that said, you know, we need flexible funding. We don't have a lot of time. We have a lot of constraints as far as just organizing ourselves and putting together a plan to really then think about what resources are required to actually do the implementation. So that's kind of the foundation of why we decided to use a pilot funding of $15 million to do a prize, which is a different type of funding mechanism that DOE has that Jenny will go into details about, to really try to understand this feedback and this market a little bit more deeply. And so that's why we're here today, is to talk to you about this 15 million pilot prize program called the Energizing Rural Communities Prize. And again, it's really rooted in the feedback of, you know, communities need a little bit more time and support to do the planning they need to be successful. We'll go on to the next slide. All of our programs under OSED include the Justice 40 initiative rolled out by the administration. This is really embedded in the community benefits plan aspects of our programs and our work, but really want to emphasize that we are looking for communities that traditionally get left behind. And we're making it more clear, more transparent, and more accountable to really allude to alignment to these types of communities in your applications themselves. So we'll move to the next slide. And I will say this is, like I said, kind of the number one parameter we were given. What is the requirement? And so applications must identify at least one area in the U.S. with a population of not more than 10,000 people. Very, very important. And if we go into the next slide, there's a few different questions and scenarios that we thought would be helpful to show you here, just so that you understand there is some flexibility here when we're talking about 10,000. So, you know, we get questions as the first, if our proposed project is meant to benefit our city, which has a population of under 10,000, but we're located in a county that covers a larger area of more than 10,000, are we still eligible? The answer to that is yes, with details here. I'm sure you all do not want me to read all of this. But if you look at the other different scenarios, it's the same answer, yes. For the prize itself and for the ERA program, there are FAQs for the prize on the HeroX webpage, which we'll share here shortly. For the ERA larger program on the OSED ERA webpage, we get a lot of questions about this. And so if you're interested in this programming and want to learn a little bit more, would really direct you to read those resources so that you can understand kind of what the 10,000 means and what it doesn't mean, and where there's a little bit of flexibility. So we'll move on to the next slide. which I think I am passing it over to my colleague, Jenny. So she will walk you through the details of the prize itself and the criteria and the resources, and then we'll wrap here at the end with questions. Thanks.
Great, thanks so much, Courtney. I am not sure if I am able to turn my video on here anymore. So apologies to everybody, but very happy to talk you through the background of this prize and really what incentivized us to get this started and make sure that we were providing the opportunities as Courtney was talking through for rural communities to get access to this funding specifically. So at the highest level, what is the Energizing Rural Communities Prize? And our intention here is really to encourage rural or remote areas to develop partnership plans or innovative financing strategies to help rural or remote communities to improve their energy systems and advance clean energy demonstration projects in rural or remote areas. So I won't go back into detail about the specific primary beneficiary requirement, but our goal here is just to make sure that there are the two different tracks that are available where we are providing access to funding to incentivize developments related to these specific partnerships that you can work with any other organizations or community-based entities or nonprofits or whatever the organization is that would be relevant to advancing your clean energy goals within that partnership track. And the secondary direction that you could take this is under the finance track, where we are encouraging people to develop new innovative financing mechanisms to improve access to capital that can help to push forward the clean energy demonstrations then as well. The prize itself is made up of two phases. So the first phase here is what is open right now through May 24th, and I'll talk through the timeline in a minute. But our hope here is that in this first phase, our applicants will submit a short summary of what they intend to achieve within either the partnership or the finance track. So under this first phase, we're looking for it's under 5,000 words to really just tell us about what your idea is, and we'll provide access to a tranche of that $15 million in funding in cash prizes to encourage you to then implement that project within your community. So in this first phase, we're actually selecting up to 90 winners. So we are selecting up to 60 communities within the partnership track and then another 30 within the finance track. So we are really hoping to distribute as much of these funds as we can across the country and provide access to this in a lot of the communities that have never received access to DOE funding before. So our primary goals for this prize are looking again into that the partnership models and the financial mechanisms that can really help us to take steps toward those rural or remote clean energy projects. Then secondarily, making sure that we are better preparing a lot of these rural or remote communities to secure this funding for their projects directly. And this can then be related to other ERA funding opportunities that Courtney will share or that Emily's going to share a little bit later in the presentation as well. And then helping us to really incentivize you guys to look at some other private funding sources that might help you to push the project forward too. Third, we're looking to better understand and further develop activities that help prepare communities to really work toward their clean energy goals. And then making sure that we're building out these networks here. So a lot of the communities that we're trying to reach within this prize are those that have been historically underrepresented within DOE's funding opportunities. So our hope is that we are working toward making these connections and making sure that there are further sustainable access to future funding opportunities for you. In terms of the potential competitors, I saw there were a few chats related to questions about eligibility. There are some examples on the screen right now, and I won't read through these here for you, but these are just intended to give you guys an idea of the kinds of organizations and the kinds of entities that we're looking for in this prize. So this is not an exhaustive list at all, but it's really just to give you an idea of the kinds of organizations that you might want to think about working with that can help to support your rural or remote area. All right, and then as it relates to the timeline here, we opened this first phase on March 1st, and it is open for this initial concept paper through May 24th. So we're asking for those first 5,000 words just by the end of May here, and we'll start the review process, at which point we will distribute the awards of $100,000 for both the partner and the finance track for each of the individual organizations that are selected as winners. And that will be for those 90 groups that I mentioned. We'll make that first winner announcement then in July, and we'll have a full year after those winner announcements are made for communities to actually implement the projects that they proposed over the course of phase 2. And our hope then is that as many of those communities that have started to work on those projects that they received the initial $100,000 toward are able to show us significant impact in their community. And those that are able to make that progress and really prove the biggest impact that they were able to make will receive an additional grand prize of up to $200,000. And those communities that are selected in phase 1 are only those that are eligible then to compete for that final $200,000 prize. And here's some logistics information for everybody to understand kind of what the process looks like. Courtney did mention our HeroX page, and the URL is here, and we're happy to share access to both these slides and to that URL in the chat as well. But that's going to be the primary place where you will find all of the information about this prize specifically. So we'll need you to create a HeroX account. You can click solve this challenge and just accept some terms of use. But all that you need to do after that is really to start the actual submission process. So you can incorporate all the information about your team. You can reach out to other organizations that may want to act as your partners on this project. You can find access to the full rules document, and you can develop your submission all within the platform itself. But the final thing I want to focus on is what I mentioned earlier as well. Our final submission date is May 24th, so just making sure that you complete all the materials that you need to prior to that date and time to make sure that everything is accepted by the deadline and we're able to actually include this in the review. And one of the other questions that we typically get asked that I want to highlight as well is that competitors do have the ability to submit multiple applications to both of the tracks, but our primary interest here, and that's related to the primary beneficiary of each of these projects, is that we're accepting and reviewing one submission per track per community served. So our hope is that we are distributing these funds as much as we can across the country and making sure that as many communities as we can, that we can provide access to this funding to, we're able to. So if you are submitting multiple applications, just making sure that you're differentiating the community that will act as the primary beneficiary for your program. All right, and we do have a few organizations under subcontract with us who are providing some additional support, both in terms of building out the network and then also providing access to some additional support features that you guys can leverage as competitors. So you'll be able to participate in some of the virtual networking events, and I'll talk about those a little bit more in a second. And then also reach out to some of these organizations that have served as these support providers on many other prizes to provide you some feedback as you develop your applications. And they've helped many competitors in the past and really help a lot of these communities that are new to DOE funding opportunities understand some of the best practices in structuring your application to make sure that you're meeting a lot of the requirements that we've defined within the rules document. Then the components for submission. So these are essentially the same within both of these tracks here with just a couple of minor differences. Both tracks will require a basic cover page, which is just some minor information about your team, who you're representing, who the primary beneficiary is, and all of the specific details that we're looking for will actually be included in the full plan. So this is really just included as a high-level background. The summary slide serves a similar purpose. This is intended to just give you a more creative way to represent the information that you're going to share with us and show us in a visual way how you're planning to implement your program. And there's no template for the summary slide, so we really encourage people to be creative with that. We also are asking for a 3-minute video pitch. We're not scoring anyone on the quality of the video that you're pulling together, but it's just another media outlet for you to tell that story and really leverage some of the community members and talk to them and share all of the background that may not come across in a written document. Under the partner track, we're asking for a partnership plan, and it is very similar under the finance track where we're asking for a project plan. This is that concept paper that I mentioned that is just up to 5,000 words, where you'll detail what the process will actually look like for the project that you are proposing within your community. And then under the partnership track, we're asking you for some evidence of commitment, and that could be letters of commitment, MOUs, or any other agreement that you're pulling together with the entities that you're intending to partner with. And then the finance track, we're asking you for a financial statement where you'll detail out the budget that you need to implement the program. And then as a quick overview of what the reviewing and scoring process is, this is another question we get quite a bit. So once we get all of the submissions in, we will assign a panel of reviewers, and that'll be somewhere between 3 to 5, who are subject matter experts from DOE, the national labs in general, other academic researchers, and then other entities who are providing that expertise from an external source. They all contribute to a quantitative score where they are providing a preliminary score of 1 to 6 on each of the scoring statements that is included in the rules document. So I'd really encourage you to review those specific scoring statements to understand what it is that we are explicitly looking for in this, because that is exactly what the reviewers are going to score you on. That 6-point scale is used to evaluate every single one of those statements, and all of those scores are summed for the individual scoring statements for us to kind of rank all of the submissions that come in. Those preliminary scores then just provide us that initial ranking, and then we as the prize administration team then discuss those preliminary scores and then agree on any adjustments that need to be made, and then recommend those winners to our leadership team at the Department of Energy. That recommendation then serves as what DOE then determines for the final distribution of funding. And that leadership member is directly acting as the final judge and will make that final determination of who is selected as our winners. And this is a visual representation of the scoring process that I mentioned. Rather than go through all of the specific scoring statements, I just wanted to give you an idea of what these scoring statements look like. On the left, you'll find in each one of the tables the suggested content. None of that content is required, but it is there just to give you an idea of the kinds of things that might help you then address the statements that are on the right. And all of those scoring statements are written so that you can understand exactly what it is that we're looking for. And that 1 to 6 scale I mentioned is here in this table that's on the right, and it will be used for a reviewer to understand how strongly do they agree or disagree with whether or not the competitor who has submitted that application meets that criteria that's outlined. All right, then I'm sure this is what you are the most interested in. What are we actually looking for within each of these tracks? So under the partner track, as I mentioned, we're really looking to facilitate or encourage the development or continued leveraging of existing partnerships within communities. But those partnerships are really intended to be a step toward some kind of a targeted outcome that you're aiming to achieve that helps to support the clean energy transition within your community. And some of those targeted outcomes could be the bullets that are listed here on the right, and that could look like project permitting, engineering studies, any other agreements that may be kind of a first step toward implementing some kind of a project. But all of these things are really just intended as examples here. We are certainly not telling you what are the most appropriate mechanisms that, what are the most appropriate outcomes for your community. We are certainly relying on you as the experts within your community to tell us what is going to be the most appropriate next step for us to take here. But these are just intended to give you some guidance on the kinds of things that we're looking for and that we're hoping to see in the concept papers that come in. And then in terms of what it is that we're going to be scoring you against on the partner track, we're first looking at the relevant experience you have in engaging other organizations, engaging with your community, and sharing with us what are those relationships that you already have developed. Looking then at the proposed activities that you are intending to pursue within your community. Outlining for us the expected outcomes and then the metrics that you're aiming to achieve over the period should you be selected as a Phase 1 winner. The budget in which you intend to use that $100,000 prize award for, and then your strategy for achieving the goals and the activities that you've outlined for the project that I mentioned on the prior slide after the prize itself has concluded. And then in terms of the finance track, we are looking for the innovative financing mechanisms that are going to help facilitate connecting communities with additional capital. So the $100,000 prize here is not really intended to support an individual project, but is intended to work with a credit union or a green bank or any other entity within a community who can then facilitate access to additional capital for these projects. So that could be additional loans, access to community solar projects, additional financial institutions that are working with nonprofits to facilitate that connection to financing. But the hope here is really not that the $100,000 is a step toward an individual project, but instead a step toward facilitating connections for community members to access capital going forward. And what that means, again, within your community is definitely going to vary, but our hope here is that you would be able to leverage those funds to better facilitate those connections to capital for your community members. And then going back to the scoring criteria here, many of these are very similar, especially as it relates to the individual scoring criteria at a high level. But the specific scoring statements are going to vary because they are much more focused on the kinds of things that you're going to achieve within your community as it relates to the finance. So related to relevant experience here, it's going to look very different. We are looking for the financial institutions and the specific background on distributing that capital within your community, as opposed to engaging community members. So make sure to read through the individual scoring statements to determine what is the most appropriate track for you to apply into. And this slide here, many of these have actually passed at this point, but you can find on the HeroX page access to recordings for some of the webinars that we've already hosted, where we dove into the individual partner track and the finance track. There is one upcoming networking event that you are welcome to attend, and that's scheduled for tomorrow. So if you guys are free, there is a registration access for that page, and I'll provide that in the chat. But the intention of that program is to offer networking opportunities for you to talk to each other and potentially find a partner that you could work with. And there are a couple of URLs that are available in this deck as well, where you can sign up for those office hours that I mentioned and receive feedback from one of our supporting organizations to help you figure out if you are kind of using the best practices to make sure that you're meeting the criteria that we've outlined for each of the tracks. And with that, I mean, I've just outlined some next steps here at a high level, but our hope is that this gives you a good idea of what these specific requirements look like and how you can leverage some of the resources that we've provided to better facilitate access to some of the resources and pull together a good application. The prize mechanism itself is intended to be this low barrier to entry and really help you guys understand what DOE funding opportunities look like and get you started down the path of accessing some of these larger funding opportunities going forward. So, so that's our intention, and I'm very happy to provide access to any of the links or the resources that I've mentioned today. And with that, I'd love to pass it back over to my colleague, Courtney, who I think will close us out with some information about some other future funding opportunities.
Thank you, Jenny. Hopefully you all learned a little bit more. Maybe you were familiar with the prize or you're just hearing of it, but hopefully you got a little bit more details into, why we did it and what we're looking for. And then we have a slew of different resources on the HeroX page that you can review and go over. I did want to call out the storyline I kind of started on is, we were really given not a lot of parameters in how we should use this funding, which is a great opportunity. And so really where we are at OSED is we're piloting a few different funding mechanisms to really understand where the market gap is and where we can really meet communities of this size and these locations in a way that really makes the most sense and really is beneficial and impactful. So we have the prize. We also have an open funding opportunity announcements that we call FOAs for larger scale demonstration projects in rural communities. The concept paper for that is due this Friday. So most likely, if you were already planning on applying to that, you've known about it and are kind of in the works. But that is a funding opportunity announcement for $5 to $10 million single site projects and 10 to anywhere to 100 million for more of that aggregator model, multiple sites across communities. We set this first funding opportunity announcement at $300 million. Something that is coming that has not been rolled out yet is we're also designing another funding mechanism for projects under the 5 million. We certainly got a lot of feedback and kind of, working with all these different communities and hearing their unique needs and resources and projects. The cost sides really did vary. And so we wanted to create another mechanisms that were for those smaller projects under 5 million and really also push in on a lot of the feedback we heard as far as capacity. That traditional applications to DOE are quite exhaustive and intensive, both in applying and management. And so we're designing this program really with those pillars of making it easier and really reducing the barriers to entry so that we can generate a more diverse portfolio. So now you know a little bit about OSET if you didn't know already, and just want to make sure that you understand, we have the prize for that early stage planning and capacity building. We have that larger scale FOA, that concept papers are coming to a close. And then we're going to have another funding opportunity announcements for projects under 5 million. So want to make sure you keep us in the loop. And then also know that when you add all that together, it still does not reach $1 billion. And we did that intentionally. So we'll learn a lot through this first round of all 3 of these opportunities, see who applies, what type of projects, kind of what are those gaps and opportunities. And then we have a real chance, to continue conversations, engage in dialogues just like this one, to really understand what did we get right, and what we didn't get right, and what would it make it a little bit more easier or maybe attractive to mobilize more entities to apply and get access to this funding. So even if you kind of can't make it for these first rounds for this program, the idea is that we're going to come back to the table with that feedback, with the data, with the partners on the ground like you all who are actually doing and leading this work, and kind of keep getting there, keep getting a little bit closer to really being the program that can be the most valuable. So it won't be certainly the last time you hear about those opportunities from us. So Elizabeth, I think I'll hand it back to you and Austin for any next steps or any questions before I know we're handing it over to some other individuals to present on some topics.
Very good. Thank you so much for that presentation. I think Jenny had, I don't know, Jenny, if you wanted to present you had a testimonial that you wanted to read.
Yes, thank you. I should have set myself a slide for this so that I would remember to share it. And I can actually share my video now. So thank you for your patience on that. But yes, as Elizabeth just mentioned, we've worked with prize competitors across the country over the last, the American Made program has hosted, I think we're up to almost 40 different prizes over the last few years. So several $100 million that have been distributed through this mechanism. And I reached out to one of our other competitors who was selected as a winner from Virginia from a different program. And I would love to share this testimonial. He was unfortunately not able to make it today, but he did want me to share some of his words with you all based on his experience. So these are, this is the testimonial he shared with me. I had never participated in a pitch competition or anything similar prior to the DOE Energy Tech University Prize pitch competition. I was very glad I took a chance and decided to take part because it served as a true jumping off point for our startup. We've made great strides toward commercialization, and I truly believe we would not have started this process without the success we found through the University Prize competition. It gave me the impetus to really explore the value of the technology we had in the lab and how we could leverage it into something more. It motivated me to put in the time to gauge the market, flesh out a business strategy, and refine my understanding of the value of the technology I could add. I was also provided with NSFI core training resources to guide this exploration. Another incredible benefit was the direct connections with experienced industry members and mentors to get feedback on our project. Their insight was invaluable, and I still use what I learned from them when seeking out partnerships, funding, and other resources today. I became more attuned to the startup ecosystem in terms of what resources are available, how to pursue commercialization, and more. This is directly translated into other grants through stronger proposals and has also prepared me for future pitches. In short, I would highly recommend participating in the Energizing Rural Communities Prize because it's such a unique learning experience. Whether you've already formed a startup or just have the beginning of an idea, the competition gives you the opportunity to shape and define your technology and business, positioning you to take advantage of subsequent activities moving forward. And while Andrew's experience was not specific to the kinds of projects that you guys are going to be working on under the Energizing Rural Communities Prize, a lot of the resources that were provided in terms of training, in terms of access to the contacts that he's talking about are exactly the kinds of benefits that you'd get from participating in a prize. And as I mentioned, it's really intended to be that kind of front door into DOE funding opportunities and to help you think about what are other ways that we can make these projects sustainable and what are some of the other opportunities that, as Courtney mentioned, are coming out that we can leverage going forward. So thank you for that, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much. Okay, let's see. Okay, next, Emily Yang is a student researcher at the University of Virginia, and she's going to share with you some additional funding opportunities that you should be aware of.
Hi, everyone. So these are just any sort of grants or programs that might be relevant for you for rural communities or looking to improve clean energy systems. The specific one is the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program, which is a $430 million grant funded by the Infrastructure Act to help state and local governments and tribes to help strategize energy efficiency programs and renewable energy investments. Program ideas could include things like creating financial incentive programs, developing conservation strategies, installing renewable energy technology for government buildings, and implementing building codes to increase energy efficiency. The deadlines to apply for any state government is going to be July 2023. And for local governments and tribes is going to be January 2024. Next slide. This is the Clean Energy to Communities in-Depth Partnership, which is a multi-year DOE program to help communities develop clean energy systems. This partnership with the National Renewable Energy Lab gives local governments and organizations access to work-along lab staff and give access to technology within the lab to test potential strategies for energy transition before deploying the strategy. Topics can range from finding costs of clean electricity grid for a city, weatherproofing new energy systems, and understanding the impacts of clean energy goals for the economy. There's also a specific $3 billion rural partnership opportunity for a selected rural community, but there are also shorter term partnerships available. And the deadline to apply for the in-depth partnership, though, is going to be May 17th, 2023. Next slide. The Rural Investments to Protect Our Environment is an $80 million pilot program that awards farmers for adopting climate smart practices and is part of the USDA's partnerships for climate smart commodities. This is an in-process pilot program, which is going to be launching in Arkansas, Minnesota, North Dakota, and in Virginia. With the pilot, RIPE hopes to award $100 per acre for farmers that adopt these climate smart practices. They also hope to research and create livestock design recommendations to provide environmental benefits, and they hope to achieve productivity increases with agricultural output. RIPE also emphasizes equity and inclusion while distributing their resources. Go to the next slide. These are also some additional opportunities that might be relevant for you all. These links will be available in the slides within our landing page. If you have any questions about the programs, please go to the program website And if the opportunity is from the Department of Energy, feel free to contact Bettina Bergu, whose email was in the first 2 slides.
Thank you so much, Emily. Okay, so now we're going to transition into the Q&A portion of the webinar. Austin will moderate the Q&A and lead into the discussion that will follow. So Austin, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so thank you, Emily and Elizabeth. And so in recognizing the time, we may just adjust some of the questions right now, or if we have time, we may go to discussion, but we also have to have a little bit of time for next steps and close out. And so if you haven't already put your questions in the box, please feel free to go down to your lower right-hand corner, go into the Q&A and add your own questions, but we already have a couple coming up. So let's go ahead and read them out. Jimmy Paris asks, is there a cap on each prize per awardee in the Energizing Rural Communities Prize?
Much for that question. So in terms of the cap, all of the prizes themselves are going to be for $100,000 specifically. So the prize mechanism functions a little bit differently than some of the other funding opportunities that are distributed from the Department of Energy that are structured as based on the budget that you propose. It is just a flat $100,000 for what you're proposing. So make sure that what you're incorporating into your concept paper is reflective of what you intend to achieve with that $100,000.
Thank you. And a second question, will the new $5 million funding mechanism becoming available in the summer be available this year?
I think this is in reference to one of the programs that Courtney was mentioning here. So unfortunately, because I work for the lab, I don't have insight into when that's going to be made available, but we'll certainly follow up with more information as soon as that is available for you.
Thank you, Jeannie. And I will say that this program was also announced in the FOA of the Energizing Rural Communities, but the Energy Infrastructure in Rural and Remote Areas program, FOA. And so that provides a little bit of information on this program. It does mention it's becoming available in the summer, and that the $5 million is the up to $5 million in federal cost share. So there's a little bit of information out there on it, but we're still waiting a little bit more, as Jenny mentioned. All right, so I don't see any other questions. One other question that I had for this prize is that we talk with a lot of different communities right now, and they're looking at a lot of different energy technologies, everything from EV infrastructure, hydrogen, solar, wind, hydro, even nuclear. And so what are the clean technologies that are of interest for the Energizing Rural Communities program, and what technologies would not meet the definition of clean energy for this program?
That's a great question. So that is a question that we've gotten a lot in terms of what are the things that we're thinking about. In terms of what is relevant to your community, I mean, this goes back to one of the things that I was sharing in one of the previous slides too. We're not in a position to tell you all what is going to make the biggest impact in your community. So we do not have specific guidelines on what are the specific technologies and areas of interest as it relates to clean energy or energy efficiency that we're specifically looking for. We're certainly looking to you for you to tell us. So there are no limitations. I would suggest that you specifically read through the evaluation criteria that are outlined within the rules document to determine if you're helping to kind of move the clean energy project within your community forward. So as long as you're meeting that high level goal and you're able to address the scoring criteria, there is not a specific limitation here. If EVs is the project that you're interested in, or hydrogen is where your community is headed, both of those are totally acceptable. And I know you mentioned several others as well. So it is very much open to your interpretation and what will benefit your community the most.
Thank you, Jenny. It's always awesome to see such flexible programs becoming available to rural communities, because these definitions that we have at the federal level and the state level oftentimes are flexible or really can reflect what communities want to see, but we can also mold to what they need to see as well. Well, I don't see any other questions in the Q&A or in the chat. And so if you have any more, please do feel free to add them in, and we'll either answer them now or after today's webinar, we're going to provide all of the questions and answers through the website. And so if we can't get it to it today, at least you'll have an answer available in hard copy through the website itself. But with that, I think we want to move us over to discussion to see if anybody would like to discuss, even if just for a couple of moments, on any of these topics. And so there are a couple of topics that we have here that are just kind of the interests. What level of interest do you see your communities having? What track, either partnership or finance, are you most interested in, or other financing programs that were mentioned here today? And then maybe even overall, what kind of support would you need for applying to any of the funding opportunities that we mentioned here today? And so if you would like, feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you and you can kind of introduce yourself, let everybody know where you're calling in from, who you are, or if you just want to provide a little bit of input to these discussion items, feel free to type it in chat and just let us know that way. So again, I'll give everybody just a minute to, if you would like to speak up, if you would like to introduce yourself or your organization, feel free to raise your hand. All right, great. I see a Ryan. So Brooke, can we get Ryan off mute?
Business owner. Myself, my name is Ryan Wilkoff. We are able to help any community that needs our help. We've previously done HEROX challenges and have had decent success with it, and so we're looking for a community in rural Virginia that needs our help building commercial renewable energy of any type.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. So yeah, like I said, we want to be able to use this space for contact building, for partnerships as well if you need. I don't see any other hands at the moment, so I'm going to give it just another minute here. Feel free to put anything in chat or to raise your hand if you'd just like to introduce yourself and mention a little bit about what you think about these program opportunities or funding opportunities. All right. Well, I know we're reaching the end of the day today, and so I don't want to keep anybody over. There will be an opportunity to answer some of these questions as well in our survey that we're going to be sending around to everybody. So please do make sure to keep your eyes out for that. And we'll go ahead and move on to the kind of the close, the next steps. And so there are a number of next steps that we can take away from this here today. For those of you that are interested in the Energizing Rural Communities Prize, make sure to check out herox.com/rural energy. It has pretty much everything you need to know to apply for the opportunities mentioned here, or for that opportunity mentioned here today, and has a very useful resource on frequently asked questions that can answer a lot of questions, even beyond what the rules kind of state. And so it's a really useful resource to utilize. Again, the deadline for this application is May 24th, so you have plenty of time to put together a team and a project. While you're there, make sure to visit the Virginia Forum page. We actually have a specific forum in Virginia for Virginia to where you all can introduce yourselves, provide what resources you need, or even request additional resources. And Elizabeth, I, and Brooke will be kind of watching and keeping track of those to make sure we're responding to everybody as needed. We'll also be sharing today's Q&A through our event webpage, so make sure you don't lose that link. And we'll be sharing a short survey to help inform additional assistance that we can provide to potential applicants and to guide our next webinar in this two-part series. And so this isn't the only series, isn't the only webinar that we're going to have. We hope to have a future one, maybe in late May to early June, that's really going to dive into a lot of other funding opportunities, such as the REAP program, or the Rural Energy, Renewable Energy for America program, that focuses on agriculture and small business. And so keep your eye out for that. And then finally, if you have any additional questions about the funding opportunities mentioned here today, or would like Virginia-specific resources for your application, feel free to reach out to me or Brooke. You can see our emails on screen, and we'd be happy to help you connect with others, gather the information you need, or really make the connections that you need to have a strong application for Virginia through any of these programs. And so that's all for us today. I'd really like to thank each of you for joining, and we hope to hear from you soon. Have a good day, everybody. Brooke, I think you should be good to pause or stop the recording.